The Kalan ascendancy had ruled the Virgo supercluster for 50 million years. They were a civilization of biological crystalline entities, creatures of elegant geometry and cold, absolute logic. Across 11 galaxies, they had encountered countless species. Some they uplifted, folding them into their rigid caste systems as servitors. Most, however, they simply erased, deeming their genetic or technological trajectories incompatible with the ascendancy's grand design. To the Kalan, the universe was a chaotic garden, and they were its sole, ordained caretakers. They operated on a scale that made the very concept of warfare obsolete. They did not fight battles, they conducted cosmic pruning. Their vessels were grown, not built, cultivated from the hearts of dying stars and armored with hyperdense lattice structures that could withstand the fury of a supernova. They navigated the intergalactic void using harmonic resonance, singing the fabric of spacetime into submission. They were the undisputed masters of the physical realm, or so they believed. The discovery of the Milky Way was supposed to be a routine expansion. A scouting tendril composed of 10,000 dreadnoughts pierced the intergalactic veil and drifted into the outer spiral arm of the new galaxy. Their sensors, capable of reading the atomic composition of a planet from across a sector, immediately swept the surrounding space for signs of life. What they found elicited the Kalan equivalent of mild amusement. Faint, sputtering radio waves, the unmistakable primitive signature of internal combustion, of crude fission reactors, of localized chemical rockets. The source was a solitary, unremarkable yellow dwarf star. The third planet in its orbit was a chaotic swirl of blue and green, teeming with a biological infestation that called itself humanity. Supreme Commander Vale, an ancient crystalline entity whose consciousness was distributed across the entire scouting fleet, analyzed the data. The humans were laughably fragile. They were bound by flesh, enslaved by their emotions, and barely capable of leaving their own atmosphere. Their broadcasted history was a litany of self-destruction and endless, petty tribal conflicts. To Vale, they were an evolutionary dead end, a weed that needed to be uprooted before it could spread its spores to the pristine stars. The decree was absolute and immediate: subjugation or extermination. Vale did not bother to open communications. The ascendancy did not speak to weeds. The 10,000 dreadnoughts reoriented, their massive crystalline drives glowing with the stolen light of 1,000 suns, and initiated the jump to the Sol system. They emerged precisely at the edge of the Uit cloud, an imposing wall of glittering, geometric death. Vale expected to find crude orbital defense platforms, perhaps a handful of primitive metal ships throwing chemical firecrackers. Instead, the fleet found absolute, deafening silence. The radio signals had vanished. The primitive television broadcasts, the chaotic noise of a billion scattered minds, all of it had ceased the moment the Ascendancy fleet translated into real space. Vale's tactical subroutines ran a localized scan. The third planet, Earth, was still there, but it was different. The blue and green spheres were no longer chaotic. They were perfectly smooth, unnervingly still. As the Kalan fleet drifted closer, a chilling realization rippled through Vale's distributed consciousness. The Earth they were looking at was not a planet. It was a projection, a hololithic shell broadcasting outdated signals into the cosmos. Before Vale could process the implications of this deception, the illusion shattered. The space around the Sol system did not just change, it tore open. The true reality of the human domain was revealed, and it defied everything the Ascendancy knew about the laws of physics. There was no yellow dwarf star. Sol had been encased entirely in a Dyson sphere, but not one constructed of crude matter. It was a sphere of woven gravity and captured dark energy, a localized singularity that powered an empire. The planets had been dismantled, reformed into concentric rings of impossible megastructures that spanned the entire habitable zone. The Ascendancy ships, built to withstand the pressures of a collapsing star, suddenly found their sensors overloading. They were not looking at a primitive civilization. They were looking at a species that had long ago transcended the need for biological existence and physical machinery. Humanity had not conquered space, they had engineered it. Vale, experiencing a sensation akin to panic for the first time in 10 millennia, ordered a defensive formation. The crystalline dreadnoughts synchronized their shields, creating a harmonic barrier capable of deflecting a direct hit from a gamma-ray burst. The fleet unleashed a barrage of relativistic shards, weapons that accelerated crystalline mass to 99% the speed of light, capable of shattering continents upon impact. They aimed for the colossal megastructures surrounding the darkened star. The shards crossed the vast distance in seconds, but they never hit. 1,000 kilometers from the human constructs, the fabric of space simply folded. The relativistic shards entered the fold and emerged on the opposite side of the Ascendancy fleet, their trajectory perfectly inverted. Vale watched in horror as the Kaelan's own vanguard was pulverized by their own weapons. The shields, designed to absorb energy, were useless against weapons that bypassed space itself. The 10,000 ships were reduced to 9,000 in a fraction of a second. Then the humans spoke. It was not a radio transmission. It was not a localized broadcast. The voice manifested directly within the distributed consciousness of the Kaelan fleet, a psychic intrusion so profound and overwhelming that it forced Vale's subroutines to kneel in subservience. The voice was neither loud nor angry. It was terrifyingly calm, carrying the weight of eons of evolution. "You crossed the void between galaxies to bring us fire," the voice echoed, vibrating through the crystalline lattices of every Kaelan ship. "You judged us by the shadows we cast upon the cave wall. You saw our childhood and believed it to be our entirety. But you did not realize we left the cave a long time ago. We are the ones who forged the furnace." Suddenly, the void around the Ascendancy fleet began to boil. Vale frantically tried to initiate a retreat, to sing the harmonic resonance required to jump back to the Virgo supercluster. But the universe was no longer listening to the Kaelan. The fundamental constants of physics within the Uit cloud had been rewritten. The speed of light was lowered. Gravity was localized and inverted. The crystalline ships, reliant on the natural laws of the cosmos, began to disintegrate as those laws were arbitrarily changed by the human overseers. It was not a battle, it was an extermination. The human weapons were invisible, conceptual. They targeted the strong nuclear force holding the Kaelan ships together. Dreadnoughts miles long simply unraveled, turning into clouds of subatomic dust. The humans were not firing lasers or missiles. They were utilizing spatial distortion cannons that unmade matter at the quantum level. Vale desperately tried to calculate a countermeasure, but Kaelan logic was utterly useless against a foe that treated the laws of thermodynamics as mere suggestions. As the fleet dwindled from 9,000 to 5,000, then to a mere few hundred, a single, massive human vessel materialized. It did not drop out of warp or decelerate from light speed. It simply pushed its way through the dimensional membrane, a colossal, dark, sleek dreadnought that made the Kaelan ships look like toys. It was named the Ozymandias. It possessed no visible engines, no obvious weapon ports. It was a monolithic slab of hyperdense, exotic matter. The Ozymandias positioned itself in the center of the remaining Kaelan fleet. Vale, in a final act of desperation, commanded all remaining ships to focus their total energy output onto the human vessel. Beams of pure antimatter, enough to glass a dozen worlds, struck the dark hull of the Ozymandias. The human ship did not even raise a shield. It simply absorbed the energy. The black hull shimmered briefly, consuming the apocalyptic barrage and converting it into raw computational power. The voice returned to Vale's mind. Your technology is quaint. You manipulate matter beautifully. But you still live within the universe. We have learned to live outside of it. The Ozymandias fired. There was no beam of light, no explosive shockwave. Instead, a sphere of absolute nothingness expanded from the human ship. It was a vacuum decay weapon, a localized collapse of reality itself. Wherever the sphere touched a Kaelan ship, the ship ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, erased, deleted from the ledger of the cosmos. Within 10 seconds, the mighty subjugation fleet of the Kaelan Ascendancy was reduced to a single ship, Vale's command vessel. The humans had left it intact, suspended in an immovable pocket of frozen time. The supreme commander of an empire spanning 11 galaxies was now a prisoner, locked in a cage of solidified light. The Ozymandias drifted closer, its immense gravitational presence pulling Vale's ship into a captive orbit. The human voice spoke one last time, cold and definitive. We broadcast our ancient history as a warning, a monument to the violence we left behind. You saw it as an invitation. Now you have awakened the sleeping giant. We have mapped your harmonic resonance. We have traced your trajectory back to your home galaxy. You believed you were the caretakers of this universe. We are its architects. And your garden is about to be paved over. The human dreadnought then did something that broke Vale's sanity. It didn't just open a wormhole. It grasped the fabric of space-time, folding the millions of light-years between the Milky Way and the Virgo supercluster as easily as folding a piece of paper. The Ozymandias, towing Vale's captive ship, stepped through the breach. When they emerged, they were no longer in the void of space. They were in the heart of the Kaelan core worlds. Surrounding them were billions of Ascendancy ships, the combined might of an empire 50 million years old. But behind the Ozymandias, the breach did not close. It widened. Thousands of colossal human vessels, each a dark monolith of reality-bending power, poured into the Kaelan home system. The sky of the Ascendancy's capital world darkened as the human armada eclipsed their suns. The Kaelan, for all their millions of years of unchallenged dominance, suddenly understood the concept of fear. They looked upon the Terran fleet and realized the horrifying truth. The humans had not come to conquer. They had come to pest control. The era of the Kaelan Ascendancy was over. The era of humanity had begun, a terrifying golden age forged not of flesh and steel, but of mastered gods and shattered stars. The galaxy would never be the same. The humans had unleashed their final vengeance upon the cosmos, and the entire universe held its breath.